From tiny acorns, mighty oak trees grow, as the saying goes. But here there's rather more to it than that. From these acorns will come some of our future supplies of timber. It's a story of remarkable growth. The acorns are sown in autumn, close together and in shallow channels made in a specially prepared nursery bed. Before being left to grow, the seeds will be pushed into the ground and covered with a layer of soil. The seeds grow into seedlings, but the growth is slow. It's taken 2 whole years to get to this size. These seedlings now need more room to develop, so they're moved into more spacious beds. By the time they're 4 years old, they're just about waist high. They'll stay here to grow for a few more years before being moved out into a plantation. The trees here are 40 years old. They look more like trees, but again, they're at a stage where they need more room to grow. Trees, like other plants, will only grow properly if they have enough light. By cutting down some of the weaker trees, more light can get in. The trees that are removed are usually sawn up and used for firewood. At this stage, they're of little use for anything else. To be of use for timber, they need to be over 100 years old. Now, the story of a tree's growth can be found in the tree itself, in the trunk of the tree where it's been cut across. Let's take a closer look. Each year the tree grows, layers of 2 different kinds of wood are formed. They form on the outside of the trunk. In the autumn, when growth is slow, a narrow layer of hardwood is formed. In spring and summer, when growth is more rapid, a broader layer of softer wood is added on, darker in colour. Over the years, the layers build up. By counting the layers, or annual rings, you can find out the tree's age. Rings vary in thickness because growth depends on the weather. At the centre of the tree, where it's oldest, the wood is quite dead and dark in colour. Only a narrow, more lightly coloured band of younger wood round the outside is alive. But you don't have to cut a tree down to find out its age. Alan Mitchell, a tree scientist, has found that as long as you know how fast a tree is growing, it's possible to get an idea of its age simply by measuring the circumference of its trunk at about chest height.
596.
Almost 6 metres. By Alan's reckoning, that makes it about 230 years old. Oak trees can go on living for hundreds of years. These are the branches of a grand old oak. The trunk is just over 9 metres in circumference, from which it's thought to be over 400 years old. But its trunk is no longer solid. It's become hollow with age. As an oak tree gets old, not only does its trunk become hollow, its height shrinks and the spread of its branches decreases. Heavy branches have to rely for support on the trunk's thin outer shell. It's the only living part of the tree. The rest has died and rotted away, which is why old oaks become hollow inside. Some branches have to be propped up if they're not to break away and die. Let's go back and watch an oak tree grow. We'll start when it's just 25 years old. At first, the growth increases steadily. It's now reached a peak, and the tree begins to die back. To a large extent, the growth of an oak is controlled by nature, But there are many other crops whose growth is controlled artificially, in large greenhouses like these. Here they're growing chrysanthemums, a plant that's grown for its flowers. The plants are not grown from seeds, but from cuttings, part of the stem cut from an older plant. They're planted in specially prepared blocks of peat. The young cuttings need water. They're given just the right amount, supplied as a mist, automatically. They also need to be kept at just the right temperature. If it gets too hot, motors in the roof open vents automatically. If it gets too cold, steam is passed through pipes that run under the trays of growing plants. Again, it's automatic. To produce roots, the young cuttings need the long daylight hours of summer. During the short daylight hours of winter, the plants can be fooled into believing it's really summer, when special lights are switched on for part of the night. Artificial sunlight. Under these controlled conditions, it's only a matter of days before the process of growth begins. The cuttings produce roots. After a month or so, the newly rooted cuttings are planted out into another greenhouse. Now the grower has to fool the plant into thinking it's autumn, when there are fewer daylight hours, because it's under these conditions that chrysanthemums in the open produce flowers. These blinds are used to reduce the hours of daylight. But how does the grower know what conditions are needed to get the best possible crop? That's where the scientists come in. Here at the Glasshouse Crops Research Institute, the growth of plants is being studied under different conditions, for example, different temperatures. In this cabinet, they're growing chrysanthemums at 15 degrees centigrade. In other cabinets, plants of the same variety are being grown at 10 and 20 degrees centigrade. Every 2 weeks, plants grown at the 3 different temperatures are taken from the cabinets to the laboratory and their growth compared. As well as measuring the difference in height, there are measurements to be made on the leaves of each plant. First, there's the number of leaves. Then there's the surface area. This is done electronically with the help of closed-circuit television. The freshly picked leaves are then weighed. As these leaves are nearly all water, the leaves are also weighed when dried. From the results, the scientists have discovered that the best temperature for getting the right kind of growth from this particular variety of chrysanthemum is 15 degrees centigrade. Let's watch how one of these plants grows. That's 12 weeks growth. Here's another way of showing it. Let's turn this chart into a graph. Throughout the 12 weeks, the stem increased steadily in height. It's now reached an important stage in its growth. The buds of the future flowers have formed and are about to open up. But this grower only wants one bloom to each plant, so he picks off all but one of the buds. The plant will now put all its energy into producing the one single flower. If we look at the graph again, we'll see that while the bud was opening, the stem's height remained the same. The growth went into the bloom. It's now time for the grower to pick his harvest of enormous flowers. It's a harvest produced by controlling the growth of the plant completely artificially. Growth is not only a feature of plants. Here we're on a rabbit farm, where in the rows of wire cages there are hundreds of growing rabbits. They're New Zealand whites. Almost every day of the year you'll find in one of the cages a litter of newly born rabbits. These are just 3 days old. At this age they're blind and furless, but they're fully formed with tiny ears and legs. One way of measuring their growth is to weigh them. This one weighs 100 grams. Now this one is 14 days old. That's 11 days older, and it's really quite different. Its eyes are open and it's covered in fur. What about its weight? 250 grams. That's 2.5 times heavier than the 3-day-old rabbit. The baby rabbits grow to become really quite large. Let's see how the rabbit grows, starting from the age of 3 days. Now the growth appears to be slowing down. A 20-week-old rabbit weighs about 3,500 grams. So how does its weight increase with age? Growth is rapid up to about 10 weeks. It then slows down and almost stops by the time it's 20 weeks old. But this graph could only be drawn because we knew the age of the rabbits. But with wild rabbits, we can't be sure how old they are, so we can't tell how they grow. That's something scientists are trying to find out. On this warren, traps are set overnight and the catch is measured the following morning. Again, weight is an important measurement. But a growing rabbit doesn't only gain weight. Its hind legs grow longer, so the length of its leg is another valuable measurement. They also measure its ears, as these grow longer with age. By tagging the rabbits as they're caught, it's hoped to build up a better picture of the way wild rabbits grow. But what about the way we grow? From babyhood till now, you've done quite a bit of growing, and you've still got more growing to do. One part of growing is getting taller. Here, a class of 12-year-olds set about finding out how one's height increases with age.
157.
They first measured the height of everyone in their own class.
164. 149.
As each one was measured, they entered his or her name on a chart of heights. Of course, they didn't forget to measure the measurers.
167.
The chart was divided into columns running across the board, each column representing a spread of 5 centimetres in height. From the chart, they found the most common height was in the middle, in these 2 ranges. A human chart was then made in the assembly hall with all the 12-year-olds in the school. They assembled into columns in order of height in the same 5 centimetre intervals. The boys and girls formed separate columns side by side. this human chart, they found once again the most common heights occurred in the columns around the middle, but they weren't quite the same two columns for the boys and the girls. If we take away the boys, we find the longest column for the girls is in the range 155 to 159 centimetres. One of the girls from this column was selected to represent the most common height for her age group in the school, Isabel. But what about the boys? The longest column here is again in the middle. It's in the range 150 to 154 centimetres. The representative in this case was Neil. But Neil and Isabel were only two of a whole group of representatives, each found to be the most common height for the ages from 3 to 17 years old. Let's get all the girls to line up in increasing order of age. We can turn this into a graph. Now we'll do the same thing for the boys. And again we'll turn it into a graph. Now what happens if we compare the two graphs? Up to the age of 12, there's little or no difference between the boys' and girls' height. Between 12 and 14, the girls overtake the boys. But by the age of 14, the boys have caught up the girls and overtaken them. We can see that more clearly by comparing the girls and boys individually as they grow. So far, there's no difference in height. But now, at the age of 12, the girls start overtaking. By 13, they're taller than the boys. By 14, they're even again, and the boys begin to take over. But we're all different. We all grow to different heights, and we all grow at different rates. These girls and boys are all the same age. The tallest has almost finished growing. The others have a lot more growing to do. Growth is something that happens throughout nature. Perhaps you can find out how nature controls it.